Hello, I'm Toycat and welcome back to the second channel geography video. This is everyone's favourite series where I talk about geography and the world and stuff. And today I want to talk about a part of the world which has always fascinated me because when it comes to borders, it's something I never really experience in person physically. Because I live on an island, which means, the Great Britain in case you're curious, which means if I want to go to another country, I have to physically go underneath a channel or I have to fly. And there's like some weird physical barrier between me and them. But for lots of other countries, it's literally like you walk across a street. The border between France and Belgium, in lots of cases, you just walk across a street and suddenly you've got a whole new set of taxes, you've got a whole new set of laws, you're in a brand new physical place, and that's really nutty to me. I know it's not so fascinating to people that live there, but this doesn't happen only once or twice with some countries, like between Belgium and Netherlands or whatever house situations. There's also countries which have, not only the one or two borders like I said, but have way more. And in today's video, because of that, I wanted to go through the countries which have the most borders, in fact the top 5 countries with the most borders, just in case you're curious which countries share the most, literally direct borders with other ones, because this kind of affects how they have relations with those countries in ways you might not have figured, particularly when it comes to the higher numbers, and I wanted to talk about that, so hopefully you all do enjoy it. So yeah, let's get straight into talking about the 5th most borders which a country has in the world. You might be curious why I'm looking at Germany the first thing here, and that's because Germany, because you can probably obviously guess this, has lots of land neighbors, and those land neighbors total to 9, which is the same as the number for the Democratic Republic of Congo. So it's actually tied here. Technically, you could argue because Germany's 9, Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, France, Switzerland, Austria, Czechia, that's the new name for the Czech Republic, Poland and Denmark, Germany's 9 neighbors, you can argue they've all got one land border for the most part, and that because, by the way, because they all like share things, they've got lots of trade point borders too, so fun little thing there. But because Germany has just mostly, these land borders in this particular way, you might argue like, oh yeah, well that's pretty solid, but it's not quite as many as the Democratic Republic of Congo's, because although they only border 9 countries, the Central African Republic, South Sudan, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, Tanzania, Zambia, Angola, and Republic of Congo, if I haven't said that already, it borders the same 9 countries, but because of the Angola's being split by the Democratic Republic of Congo, let's just call it the DRC for now, because that's a really long name, and there's 2 Congos anyway, so the DRC borders Angola here, but it actually cuts it off at the coastline right here, which means it looks like it borders 10 countries, but it's actually just another part of Angola, but that's still kind of like 2 different bits of the same country. So yeah, DRC comes 5th in our top 5 list. However, you've got to bear in mind the DRC is bordered by these countries right here, which are eventually going to combine into one country. Again, that might stall at some point, but right now, all of their official aim is to become one big East African Union, and that's something that we might end up seeing, and that would bring the DRC down to having, 4 fewer land neighbors, or 3 fewer land neighbors, and 4 fewer countries nearby, I guess, and that would bring it down to not being 5th on the list. So yeah, the DRC might lose its spot to Germany, but right now they're tied, and right now the DRC's arguably ahead, but that's the 5th country of the most borders. What country has more than 9 borders, you might question, with 9 separate countries? And that's where Brazil comes in and says, well, about that, I actually have 10. Ups it a little bit, because there is not only Uruguay right here, we got Argentina, we got Paraguay, we got Bolivia, we got Peru, we've got Colombia, you want to be really clear on that, Colombians really hate it when you pronounce their country wrong, we got Venezuela, we got Guiana, which, again, like kind of a British old thing, we got Suriname, Dutch old thing, and we got French Guiana, which although it's not its own independent country, it does mean that Brazil actually borders France indirectly. You might think France and Brazil, they share a border. Yes, they do, because French Guiana, like all of the other French territories, which I get into like every 5th video, but all the other French territories are officially a part of France, and that's kind of that. They have to use the euro, they vote in French presidential elections, and because of that, France and Brazil actually do share a border. A fascinating fact you might not have known about Brazil. So yeah, boom, that's 10 borders for Brazil, and you might think, well, I mean, that makes sense, because they're in this weird part of the continent where the Portuguese, like, they had a lion and they just took everything to the right. It makes sense that they're surrounded by various Spanish states, but then, and also, like, it's a big, weird place, but you might then say, like, well, that's gotta be the most, right? How can you go above 10? And the answer to that is, well, like I said, France considers a lot of parts of the world to be its territory, and because of that, although it only has 8 natural land borders, so Belgium, Luxembourg, Germany, Switzerland, Italy, as you can see right here, Spain, they're the main 6, and then 2 micro-states, or micro-countries. We got Andorra right here, as you can see, a very fascinating place between Spain and France, and because of, by the way, because of this thing right here, and because of a weird glitch between a treaty between France and Spain actually border each other 3 times. Yeah, again, it looks like it's 1 time, but they actually border each other once here, and then once around this town right here, because it was like a weird agreement between the French and the Spanish, where they had to cede all of the towns north of this place, but officially this was a city, so it didn't have to be ceded, and yeah, because of that, there's a bit of Spain, which is entirely bordered by France. It's very fascinating, and again, it's not even separated by very much, but it means that, yeah, between the two, it's a little bit tense and a little bit weird, and that's why you see things that look like this. So, yeah, with that said, let's move on from, sorry, by the way, that's the 8 we have right there. Let's move on from those, and let's talk about the other 3, because I said 11, not 8, right? You might be like, well, I mean, even if you're looking at the 2 microstates of Monaco and of, so this is Monaco right here. You've heard of Monaco, famous for gambling and F1 tracks and rich people and stuff like that. I mentioned them in my England video. But yeah, as well as that, we've got Monaco right there. But then you might say, well, there's not really any others to look at. Well, you've kind of tricked me. This is over. You can't say they border London because there's no land there. Well, let's talk about the 3 countries they also border, because like I said, they border Brazil and they border Suriname. So boom, we got 2 more right there. That's still only 10, but they also border, surprisingly, because if you look on the map, France and Netherlands cannot border at all. There's this giant lump called Belgium in between them. So yeah, we got Belgium stopping France from bordering the Netherlands in Europe, but if we go to the Americas, France and the Netherlands actually border each other quite well. This island right here is called Saint Maarten, at least in English, and then you got the island of Saint Maarten, which is the French side, I believe, and then we got Sint Maarten on the south side, which is the Dutch side. This place is really famous for having that airport where the people get blown off the thing. It's fascinating to look at. Go do that sometime. But yeah, this is a fascinating island in its own right, but it means that because this is officially the Netherlands and this is officially France, it means France and the Netherlands share a border and you can cross from one to the other in North America, which is wacky when you think about it, but it's a thing that you can do right here. And yeah, that's just a weird little part of the North America. You know, North America has lots of weird almost borders between countries, like, you know, Denmark technically almost borders Canada, such as, you know, France almost bordering Canada with one of their weird maritime provinces right here. There's just lots of weird things, especially when it comes to France in the world, and that's one of them that brings France up to 11 borders. And again, you might say, well, that's a technicality. You can't have more than that legit, can you? And that's where Russia steps in and says, well, we're actually the world's biggest country, so we have lots of different places. So most of the borders of Russia are because of the fall of the Soviet Union, but let's go through them one by one, because you might, there's still a lot of surprises in there, because everyone knows Russia and Ukraine. Makes sense. They're always having those little, I was going to say like petty squabbles, but like fairly serious squabbles as it so turns out. But, you know, they're always having squabbles. That makes sense. Russia, Ukraine, but then also Belarus. Then we've got Latvia, Estonia. Oh yeah, those are also, you know, we hear about that all the time. Then they've got Finland, but then the surprising ones come with stuff like Norway, which again, it's all the way up here. Then as we follow it around, we've got some less surprising ones again. Georgia, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, again, former USSR state. We got Mongolia over here. Again, it wasn't allowed to be a USSR state because of reasons which are relating to China. And then also we've got a tiny, tiny, tiny border with China right here. A much, much, much wider border with China right here. And then most surprisingly to most people is Russia genuinely borders North Korea. There is a straight up border between Russia and North Korea. And although there's no official way to cross it because it's a river and there's like one bridge that goes over and sometimes they put coal across it, I believe. I don't know even where the bridge is, but there's a bridge between Russia and North Korea. People aren't really meant to go across it, especially if they're not North Koreans. There is a way to get between Russia and North Korea directly, but then the 2 other surprising countries, once you've got all of those, again, you say, well, you look at a map, you got like only, you know, you've only got like 10 of those or 12 of those right there to look at, and the other 2 come from over here, as you can see, Lithuania, and you've got Poland. So because Kaliningrad was a part of Prussia, and then got lost by Prussia, or separated from Prussia, and then during World War II, when the Russians were going east, they were just like, you know, we'd quite like a warm water port, and although it's filled with Germans, what if we just got rid of all the Germans from Königsberg, which was what it was called at the time, and renamed it something Russian? And they did that, and now it's a Russian part of Europe. Again, it was Russian, like, part of the Soviet Union, and it was all kind of fine. And then when the Soviet Union collapsed, they just kind of kept it for themselves. It's very weird that this exists here, but it is surrounded entirely by EU member states, by NATO states, and it's just this weird, like, how about that then? So yeah, that's Kaliningrad and the Russian exclave, which means that Russia actually borders another 2 countries, but it's not the most bordered country in the world because that title belongs to China. So China and diplomacy in the world is a very weird thing because, again, the border between China and North Korea comes up so much when you're talking about, you know, North Korea, because you might think, why haven't we gotten rid of that yet? And the easy answer is like, well, China probably isn't a big fan of that, right? Like, yeah, personally, I wouldn't be a fan of my friends if they nuked my neighbors. So, yeah, we've got the big thing where, like, China just about supports North Korea because it's like a buffer state between them and, like, it keeps them safe in a way, even if it's crazy, and that's a way oversimplification and probably missed the point. But my point being is that's why North Korea is supported, and this is also why China has interesting relations with a lot of countries you might not know. So Pakistan and India technically both border them. There's the whole Jammu and Kashmir thing where like there were rulers that weren't reached by the British properly, but kind of like kept their own princely, whatever. It's the India-Pakistan-China border situation is such a mess. I know Pakistan and China have just about evened things up, but if you look on the map, you can't see clear borders here because everyone has their own story about what the borders are, and sometimes they don't even have a proper story. They just say like somewhere up to there. So yeah, we don't know who this belongs to, but there's lots of mountains there, and that's kind of nice, including K12, pretty famous one. But yeah, so basically, yeah, it technically borders Pakistan and it borders India, although sometime in the future it might stop bordering Pakistan, but probably not because they agree they border each other. So yeah, they're the two like, let's get those out of the way. But then all the other countries where there's no real crazy diplomatic issues are Russia, although actually that's a big diplomatic one. But Russia and China, they have interesting relations all the time. That was the big split, and now they're kind of friendly, and usually they're like the other side of the world when it comes to this sort of thing. Then we've got Mongolia. Again, Mongolia could not become a state in the USSR or a republic, even though they really wanted to be, because China said like that was like against a treaty they signed. So boom, China-Mongolia relationship. Also, most of Mongolia is inside China, so they have some interesting relations back and forth, including where Genghis Khan was actually from. So yeah, fun fact. In Mongolia, more Mongolians in Mongolia than in Mongolia. Yeah, now you know. So yeah, that's Mongolia, the second or the fifth after Russia, North Korea, India, and Pakistan. Then we've got in between them Kazakhstan, USSR country, Kyrgyzstan, USSR country, Tajikistan, again also there. They've got Afghanistan by this tiny little stretch right here. I mean, it's not really that big of a deal, but they do border Afghanistan, and that's just a thing they do. But bear in mind, by the way, all of the borders between China and other countries are not in the most populated areas. This is like the metropolis, like the big urban population center where there's 1 billion people living, and then the rest of the country is just where all these borders happen. So yeah, and they got lucky with where the borders were drawn, I guess. So then also we've got after Tajikistan and Afghanistan, so the four stands, if you will, the Stan Bros. We've also got Nepal, we've got Bhutan, sorry. We've got Myanmar or Burma, depending on who you are in the world. I don't know about the issues. I'm just saying both the names it says here. Even Google Maps is just like, look, it could be either. Then we've got Laos. So Laos is obviously another one they border. They've got Vietnam. Again, big player in the Vietnam. You can see how all of these things came about, right? Like, oh yeah, China borders this place, which is really, really far away, but because China's so big, the second or fourth or third biggest country in the world, depending on how you measure, because it's so big, it kind of comes up like this. And then finally, it has two more borders with other countries, because it doesn't border Taiwan, but it technically borders Hong Kong and Macau, which aren't countries, but technically count as countries as far as a lot of, like, at least as far as I could tell, as far as most things were concerned, because there is a hard border right here. You have to cross it, you have to go from China to Hong Kong, you have to go from China to Macau, and yeah, Macau is former Portuguese territory. Hong Kong is a former English territory or British territory, and because of that, there is technically 16 borders between China and other places. This is why they not also, you know, when you count the China Sea, it's just like another bunch of countries. This is why China has pretty much direct relations with every other country involved. It's not that they have like an alliance they have to deal with, like, oh yeah, the EU will comment on Donald Trump sometime, or like, you know, sometimes this or that will happen. No, China has all these direct issues with countries literally next to them, and that's why they're so focused on these issues. Even if they try to, you know, aim inwards, they've got to deal with all of these borders, and that's why the borders of a country kind of affects how it deals with its neighbors. So, well, I guess how it has to deal with countries in general, because a lot more of them are its neighbors or indirect neighbors in some way. So, hopefully you did enjoy today's video. That was a lot to go through. Oh, actually, wait, one more thing to add is that technically the EU can be considered a country in lots of ways. You might say, well, they're not sovereign or this or that, but they technically, by some definitions of country, are a country, and you can't really say they're not, and they have a lot of like weird delegations to things where they wouldn't if they weren't a country. So technically, if you count the EU as a country, they have 20 land borders, and that's a bit of a messy thing. But yeah, just keep that in mind. If you count the EU as a country, then they've got 20. If you count the, you know, the East African Federation is already happening, then DRC is not number 5. And there's a lot, basically, borders of this messy thing where they exist where we say they do, and that's why we end up with this video where you're still not quite sure what's going on, but you learned a thing about how China is this big old mess over here. So hopefully you all enjoyed this. Second channel, don't care. Goodbye, F9.